So good morning, everyone. Today's what, August, no, not August yet, July 28th. July 28th, this is our 259th meeting of the Equal Employment Practices Commission. I'd like to call the meeting to order. The time is 10:31. First, we can have the Second Director, Jimmy Victor, do the roll call commission.
Chair and Commissioner Bonilla,
Present.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Reese,
Here.
Commissioner Alcantara, present. Commissioner Alfaro,
Present.
Commissioner Yearwood. Present.
Thank you. We have quorum. And we can say this, right? And the reason for the jubilance and the excitement is that we're joined by two new commissioners. And who will introduce themselves in a second, Commissioner Yearwood and Commissioner Okawa. And long anticipated, your arrival's long anticipated. You're welcomed here. We're very excited to have you. I know that you held the hearings already. Council voted on your appointments. I'm not sure yet whether you've been sworn in or whether like Sweeney or you the paperwork that our executive agency, the general counsel will work with you on.
I have it.
We'll have it, so we'll get those formalities out the way. I think also there might even be opportunity for the swearing. There's a special book that you can sign. Like Sweeney's office and the clerk's office, which is a very exciting book. You'll be there with LaGuardia, Roosevelt, Dinkins, and everybody else who signed on book. So it's a very momentous occasion. So we've saw the hearings, actually longer than I expected. Probably great questions. And it's very exciting to hear about your vision, your passion, and your purpose, and the reason for wanting to give up yourself, your talents, and your time, pretty much on a public service basis to serve on this commission. So we thank you for that. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Okawa to give us just a brief introduction so we get to know them.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm very excited to be here. I come by way of being a community organizer, I guess, a social entrepreneur and attorney. And my core values are justice and fairness. So I'm so excited to be here. I live in Harlem. And I'm just really happy to be here and help the city of New York have the best practices so we can hire and maintain the best people. Thank you.
Commissioner Yearwood?
My name is Nicole Yearwood. I'm definitely excited to be serving I like to where I was born and raised in the Patrick as a young woman who grew up in Harlem, born and raised. That I reside here. I never thought I would be in a position to serve in this particular way. I think it's definitely important. I mean, employment is the vehicle, it's how we raise our families. It's people's bread and butter. And so I really take this role, very seriously, making sure that our city has fair practice. I come from a background of civic engagement, voter education, civic participation, and also ensuring fairness. I've been doing this for a long time, since I was a college student, is where I kind of started, honing my skills in this area. So I'm just happy to be here to serve and lend my skills.
Thank you. And just for the application of the new commissioners, I'd like to give a brief moment to Commissioner Reese and Commissioner Alcantara to just introduce themselves and just a little bit of background as well. Just, just so we can have that kind of fulsome overview of the commissioners. Commissioner Reese?
I'm an attorney. I've run for public office. I ran both for city council and Manhattan Borough president and completed both times. I am a resident of the city, born and bred and schooled here and went to law school here. I spent about half of my professional life in the public sector. in the private sector as general counsel of a publicly held company, and also running a not-for-profit private self-regulatory unit. And when I ran for office, I then went into the public sector and discovered what being a public servant meant. I still have some very dear friends from that period of time in the public sector. As a general counsel, which is the role I play almost my entire life, I clearly had to deal with equal opportunity and EEOC laws and understanding really being fair to an employee base. The corporation that I was general counsel for had a corporate culture that made us much a family, and to this day, we still speak to each other, and I still am in touch with my chairman. So it was a family. I have served on the EEPC, I think now for over 10 years. Is that
Since 2009.
2009?
13.
13. Who's counting when you're having fun? And during that time, I have seen the EEPC evolve and become far more an activist entity, and really begin to mold the employment of the city's employees into being more fair, for want of a better term. We used to have far more agencies that were not in compliance than we do today. There's a clear, better understanding of what their role is. There is still more to be done. It is amazing to me that with the small staff that we have been as effective as we have been in having people understand what they have to do in terms of being a fair employer. You may or may not know this, but the New York City itself is the largest employer within the city. What it does and how it treats its employees makes a difference. What they know within their employment here alters them. They seek employment outside, and certainly as they come enter this employment market. Anyway, that's who I am. I'm also a grandmother. I have 4 grandchildren. The oldest is 31, and I'm not old enough to have a 31-year-old. And the youngest is turning 20, so somewhere in between, something happened that I don't know.
Commissioner Gata?
Thank you. My name is Miroska. I personally think that I've been a public servant my whole life, but working in public service, it's been altogether like 15, 17 years between New York and Illinois. I'm from the Dominican Republic. I've lived all over, not all over, in 4 different states. I started in Washington, D.C., then moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to Champaign-Urbana, and now New York City for the last 13 years. And I'm a civil engineer, so I'm a construction manager. Now I'm head of the New York State Beach Authority. So this commission has been great because, being here representing the city employees is a great lesson for me because I take all the learning to my agency and I'm like, haha, I know better. So this is awesome. The staff is amazing. Jim does an amazing job. And we have an extraordinary chair and vice chair. So, welcome. And this is a great place.
Thank you. We thank you.
My name is Alden Bonita. I'm the chair and commissioner here at the EEPC. In my other hat, I'm also the executive vice president of the Fund for the City of New York. I also chair the Manhattan's COVID recovery task force. I guess, I like to lead with beliefs and values, which is what kind of driven me to this opportunity. I believe that talent is evenly distributed among all people and communities. I believe opportunity is not. So this is a way for me to ensure that opportunity is accessible to all corners. I believe that public servants get a bad rap. Being a civil servant, to be a civil servant is an honorable calling. I believe government does more things right than wrong. And far too often we scapegoat our public servants and our public. God is be surrounded by people who support them. Understanding that the nuances and the difficulty of the public sector. And lastly, I believe that solid middle class path to middle class status and to opportunity is government work, could be. Retirement security, being a former trustee of the pension fund. I think to the extent that certain populations are excluded from opportunities to serve government, means that they have a lifelong delay or disadvantage in having retirement security. Incomes commensurate with what it takes to live in a city as expensive as New York City. So those are kind of what's driven me to want as you to be part of the solution, part of the oversight of the city. Next, I'd like to turn, because we now have welcoming new commissioners, welcoming the new director of research. What's your pleasure? Director, you could just share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So in terms of my values, I could not agree more with what was said throughout the table. I think that opportunities are not equal, and any work that is done to improve that is tremendously important. I come from a background working for the last few years in the area of criminal justice, in quotes, I would say, where disadvantage and inequality and prejudice, it just permeates the system, and just was a daily reminder of the unequal opportunities and disadvantages that particularly people of color face in that world, young people of color. And so I'm really excited to be here. This is my first time working for the city. I've been in nonprofit work since then. And I'm really looking forward to working with all of you to answer the questions you have. We have a lot of data, I've already learned, and I think that there's a lot that we can do to use that data to help improve the city's practices, help improve information transparency, and to help in the fight for justice. And I also just want to say as well, working for the city can have its ups and downs in terms of onboarding. I want to thank Jean and Jen and Michael and Dennis and everybody here for helping make the transition as smooth as it possibly can be. And it's been great. Thank you.
One more second to give a little bit more. So my background professionally is government relations. I worked for the city in the past, one elected official, so I understand the onboarding process well. I also worked for a nonprofit that had a very close relationship with the Parks Department. So I worked with the Parks Department as well. So having that background, and then just coming off of working on the 2020 census for the federal government, for the Census Bureau, I have an understanding of the demographics, and I would say the changing demographics of the city, and I think I could bring that experience.
One addition, I think our focus has been, and our change focus is looking at promotion. It is looking at promotion. It isn't so much an entry level issue. Look at the demographics of the city employees. It's where they're employed and what the ability is going forward up as one of 10 women in my law school class has graduated. The world has certainly changed from there, but for a very long time, I would look at the large law firms in the city and say, and where's the female managing partner? That too has changed. Commissioner Alcantara can tell you about how few women there were that were engineers. And I apologize for focusing only on gender, but I use it as an example rather than saying that is the only issue. But it takes a while for the, if you will, the the person who has not been given opportunity to crash through that, these glass ceilings, we can use other things, to be able to be a member of the club. And what we're about, I think, is focusing on what are the steps of the ladder to join the club that are missing. It goes to retirement benefits. It goes to the ability to, after 20 or 30 years, what's in that nest egg. If you haven't been at the top, that nest egg is diminished, it's smaller than the other nest egg. And that tends to be where a good portion of women are. They're here, but they're not here. I apologize, but I think that's that's our changed focus. Our changed focus is not necessarily bringing people in, but our changed focus is looking at where are they and how can we help them get to that next step? How can we help the entity help?
But, and, just to punctuate a point, in terms of what I like to see is that, the change focus, the oversight, what we should be asking, what we should be collecting, what we should be looking at, really comes from your passion, your purpose, and your lived experience. The city should be, how it should be, as well as what the charter laws say. So definitely forward to that. And I know that Director of Research Russell, a lot of your work, happy that in terms of Commissioner O'Connell, from what I saw from the hearings and stuff, brings a really all complement skill sets, but I was particularly grateful to the analytical lens and research methodology. So data rate see these issues through. And I think from an organization that as a charter mandate has research, data collection and analysis and auditing as part of our mandate and purview, but has a very small current capacity around that in terms of our research unit and everyone that we can dedicate to that effort, having that in-house capacity. I know Commissioner Yearwood, from your hearing, your experience around not only being professionally trained as a data analyst and a public administrator, having worked with the Census Bureau and the census data being such central to much of the work we do. Welcome, talent. Next, I'd like to turn it over to the folks, the civil servants that so much, do the work so exceptionally well on our behalf. I'd like to turn it over to Executive Director Jim Victor, because then turn it over to Scott. But just brief introduction.
Sure. Jean Victor, I've been with the EEPC now for a little over a year. I came from state government in New Jersey, where I spent a lot of years there at various departments. I always said I was in training to be governor because I was going around all the different departments. I have a lot of experience in EEO. I used to be the head of the Office of EEO for the state of New Jersey for all 70,000 employees in the executive branch. I started off my career as a civil engineer as well. Born and raised in Brooklyn, went to school in Brooklyn, and graduated from law school at night. And I worked in the Attorney General's office for 9 years, basically handling. It started off with construction claims, condemnation, and then I went into employment, and I represented the Department of Transportation in for their EEO office, their federal, because they receive federal dollars. So I come here and I'm hoping to make a difference. I'm enjoying the work, enjoying the people, enjoying the mission that we have here, and forward to really, taking this commission, from this side of the table and to new levels.
Hi, so I'm Jennifer Shaw. I'm Executive Agency Counsel, and I also wear a second hat of Director of Compliance. I've been with the EPC for actually almost 4 years to the day. I started in July of 2018.
Happy
And,
anniversary.
And
and
I hope you think it's happy.
it is certainly is happy, for sure, especially today. First time ever having a full board at a meeting that I have attended. So, and I've been here 4 years. So this is a moment in history to both books, in my opinion. Prior to working at the EPC, I worked in the general counsel's office at DCAS. I worked on civil service appeals and other employment matters. Prior to that, I was in private practice in New Jersey, but I considered myself still a public servant because all of my clients were public entities, represented school boards, and I had a housing authority and some local public utility type of organizations. And prior to that, I clerked in the appellate division in the state of New Jersey as well. I grew up in New Jersey. I went to school in New Jersey. But I did move to the city about 7 years ago. And I feel like it's my home now, and it's where I'm committed to doing what we do. And I have the opportunity to work with fantastic people. As director of compliance, I oversee half of the staff in this agency who make up our audit unit. And we have a huge mandate. We have a lot of important work that needs to be done with a very small amount of people. And I have to tell you that everyone that sits out there is dedicated and hardworking and really committed to the mission of this agency. So I feel blessed in that to be able to work in an environment like that where people really do care about the work that we do. And that's kind of essential in an organization such as ours.
I'm going to interrupt for a minute. One of the things that the prior executive director did in delivering our ability to, with a small staff, to be able to audit the entire city every 4 years is to make us do a lot of it using technical, using doing, and having a lot of it in collection of data being done rather than them. So one of the pieces that I've said over the 13 years that I've been here, we've been able to meet our mandate annually because of the electronic instance.
Like to do for.
Which gives us a lot more data.
Yeah.
Next, I'd like to turn it over to Michael.
I'll do a brief intro. My name is Michael Pinckney. I'm administrative audits here in Executive Services at the EEPC.
Speaking aloud, you could repeat.
Oh, sorry. Michael Pinckney, administrative audits and executive services here at the EEPC. So I have the great opportunity to work across all the departments of the EEPC. I started here approximately 3 years ago. Started off as the EEPC program analyst until I became the administrative audits. Prior to that, I was a program manager Department of Small Business and Services, served as a government specialist where I worked for city veterans and worked with them in getting housing, shelter, and things like that. Prior to that, I taught English for 10 years at Severian High School in Brooklyn, in Harlem.
We got a Harlem massive representative.
Yeah.
We have New Jersey, we have a New Jersey, Mike.
Ireland is
So
taking
next-
over. I'm
so
almost in Ireland.
Next, a motion to the approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion? So we have Commissioner Reese motions, Commissioner Alcantara seconds. All in favor, any discussion on voting on the minutes? So all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. All opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, the motion passes. Next is subsection 3, subsection A is old business, update on meeting with the city council speaker. Executive Director Victor.
Yes, this item was put on the agenda. At the time, we were trying to put together a meeting with the Speaker of New York City Council. That meeting was scheduled for today after this meeting, but it was since been canceled. And I believe the new date that they are looking for is August 16th at 2:30. We do not have.
But we do not meet in August. So I was saying we could get back to them and say maybe for September when we're doing, so that it could be after our meeting, so that we don't have to, with all things of summer, have an issue. What was the September one? Next, we have subsection B under section 3, old business, establishment of the advisory committee. As you get updated establishment advisory committees for the benefit of the new commissioners, you can just get some context.
Yes. So, one of the, powers that are specifically enumerated in the city charter for the EEPC is the establishment of an advisory committee. So, as we are embarking on our research projects, we kind of thought it might be a good idea to initiate an advisory committee as a brain trust sort of, to help guide us as we continue down, to do our research.
I'm interrupting Jean. Jean is being too nice. For my years of being, and I served in the city, both at something called the Department of Employment and then as general counsel of DeWitt. The city is composed of silos. If it weren't silo-like, life would be more interesting. Because it's silo-like, there is not a great sharing. And therefore, when Jean would ask for data from DCAS, which in fact she's entitled to, and to get, it takes a long time and we have to look for it. And meanwhile, we have a deadline getting a report out. But we can't make that deadline because we can't get the data. The thought, I think, is if we have advisory committees and therefore representative of some of those silos working with us, it may well give us access to the data more easily. I'm not going to say with greater frequency, because that would be playing of slots and casino. But there is some hope that with members of the groups that are supposed to be helping us within the tent as opposed to outside the tent, we may well get the data earlier. I'm sorry, Jean, you were being too nice.
It's okay. So what we propose to do is in your packet, you'll see that there are some letters that are still in draft form. We put together these letters and addressed them to various organizations. One is we have the New York City Commission on Human Rights. We've included the University Director for Talent Acquisition at the CUNY Community Colleges. We looked at the Commissioner for DCAS, the Chair of the Committee on Civil and Human Rights in City Council, the Chair for the Committee on Women and Gender Equity in City Council, and the New York City Office of Labor Relations, that's the Commissioner there, as well as the Diversity and Inclusion. Actually, I should give her the full title, the Chief Advisor to the Mayor for Employee Relations, Chief Equal Employment, Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Office of the Mayor. So we thought we covered various branches of government between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And if that is okay with the commission, then we'd like to have authority to send these letters out.
So if the commission feels that strategic or institutional partner has been left out, or that should be expanded in terms of the purview of the team, be invited to this advisory committee. While you may not have that recommendation almost now, if you could think about it and then send those recommendations to the executive director and cabinet so that we can consider inviting additional members. We don't want the advisory board to be too large, but we want it to be, I think 12 is a good number. We want it to be 10, 12. We want it to be, we want to be able to have a diversity of institutional voices, players.
And we clearly are independent, so we are neither a mayoral agency, nor are we the council group. And so it is reaching out to make sure that the people that are on this committee also represent the other interests.
Commissioner Collins?
So is judiciary or administrative law not included kind of in the purview? Because like judiciary branch or like administrative law, I just noticed that I didn't see any of that there, and so I'm just wondering, because we talk about executive and legislative, but I'm just wondering if that other.
They play no role really. I can think of negotiating.
I think for the benefit of everyone, if everyone could hear what's being spoken, so people could just speak louder. You
Yeah.
said that the judiciary doesn't really play a role.
The ALJs don't play a role with what we do. So I understand, but they really aren't. We have no ability to censure anybody. We have no ability to fine anybody. And to the extent that someone is going to litigate an issue based here, it's outside of our. So I hear you, but I don't know what they would bring to our discussion. And I'm not quite sure, on the other hand, maybe we should be looking at the law department.
So I was gonna turn to Jennifer next to see if you had any thoughts on that, as well as the law department. She got to some comment. The law department should be points to this advisory.
I think the law department would be a good pick because if any of the claims that are brought against the city internally are then elevated to external agencies, the law department generally
Law department defense.
yeah, they take on the defense. So I think that someone from the employment group, I have a couple of ideas of who, I think that would be a good addition as well.
That deal with it, we still have a vacancy.
I think that, I know the person that is the NYPD diversity and inclusion EO officer. I think that should be great, and I think that we should include the transportation in WP and TA, because they represent a large segment where women are underrepresented, minorities are nowhere to be found.
No. There I disagree.
Finish your point. Commissioner Atenta?
That was basically.
No, there I disagree, because if we're looking at, once we include the agencies, the largest employer is the police department. I don't, the reason for including the law department was reacting to Ngosi's point about the judiciary. And to the extent that we don't have someone who's focusing on the EOC law, that's one thing. Once we start going down the road of DOT, then why isn't the police department there and why isn't the fire department there? I don't think that's what you're attempting to do. I think that's and maybe the law department's wrong in that context, but it plays a different role, I think, Commissioner, than DOT. We're not looking at individual employers as advisory or individual EOC. We're looking at the law up here, the data and the law.
I think that maybe that's part of the problem, that we always stay up here, and the people down here don't know what the people up here are even talking. Because honestly, the reports, some people read reports, but some people listen when they're being told, or when they participate in things like this. That, and I think that it should be a mix and match of both, where you have the people who legislate, the people who think the big thought, and the people who actually implement through their understanding of what they heard that somebody said that they want to do. But that's my personal perspective, that maybe a combination of the two may be the way to go. Because I see that we have, all the people here are very great, from my perspective. But none of these people personally impact, the city worker. But if we bring the top players, police, MTA, I don't know what, the fire department, the sanitation, they will hear how their policies or lack thereof impact these groups. And I thought that this is what we wanted to do. But then, you know, I yield to.
Commissioner Hewitt?
I was gonna say, I just want to get clear, because I didn't have these letters in advance on the, what is the goal for this advisory?
Great question. Let me direct the.
Derek, tell us who we should have on that.
Right, so what we're trying to accomplish is to create a group of people that can help to guide us, guide the EEPC, as it starts to delve into employment issues through the research unit. We're in the process of completing our second report rather, on underutilization in city government, and
Our second mandated report.
our second mandated report. And as we start to delve deeper into these issues, it may be worthwhile to make sure we have other stakeholders at the table so that we address all the issues, we become aware of all the issues, and we try to come up with solutions that would be all encompassing. Does that make more sense?
So they have different committees in the city council, because there is with the election committee.
So we included the two committees on city council, the Committee on Women and Gender Equity and Civil.
Yeah, but they have oversight of everybody else.
Vice, I have everything. That domain. Commissioner O'Connell?
So I think I heard you say you wanted to have like up to like 12 representatives. And there's 7 here now. And I'm just wondering, just thinking about the idea of bringing in police and sanitation. It seems like so just thinking that like CUNY is one of the places. I think that the police department has at least as many employees as CUNY. And so then I would think about like, how are the different segments of the city employees represented within who we're talking to? So like if only about 20% are represented here, that means we need a bigger sample because the sample's not representative of the actual issue in the agency. If that makes sense.
It's a great point. There's 6 extra large agencies, of which 5 or so are highlighted in this report. So perhaps in relation to this report, in relation to getting a good sample of the overall workforce, getting us to maybe those extra large ones, we could get up almost like 50% of the workforce.
Close to it.
So
What if we did uniform services?
Commissioner Reese,
We did uniform services, have education, HHS, so whatever else, like the social services. We did it by category. So
like
make sure
have one representative of uniform
one,
service.
one uniform services, one from social services, welfare. You know, then you put, in that context, you put the Department of Transportation in there.
So if you look at anything that is related to construction, transportation between EDC, BPC, DOT, and TA, they control a large segment of the population.
Right.
There are no women, very few minorities, working on those fields that hire a lot of people. Somebody, I don't know, it could be the city council chair of transportation or MPA, whomever. I don't know who the entity is.
MTA is not a city agency.
It's a state agency, but they receive a lot of city
I
funding.
know, but
Then
we
do
don't, we have no
DOT.
jurisdiction over them.
Okay, then DOT, DDC, EDC. There are many of those in the construction field that are significant.
So, if the EPC, if you guys could come staff to come back to us. There's 7 letters that are going out. We come up with suggestions of 6 additional ones. The rationale of how that enhances the purpose of the advisory in terms of the constituency that are being added. It's uniform. It's not sectors that we have evidence that there's organizations or clarity. And then, present that list to the commissioners so that the commissioners can weigh in final approval. Commissioner Reese and then Commissioner Ewing.
Are you having, actually, this is for Jennifer, have problems getting data from either the police or the fire department?
In terms of research data, I don't know because I haven't been involved. In terms of audits, both FDNY and NYPD have been very cooperative with the EPC when we conduct audits of their EEO offices.
So in terms of data, it comes generally from TCAS. We don't generally work with the agencies directly. So we've been trying to, work with TCAS to get the data. But there's a lot of data out on open data as well, and we've been using a lot of.
I'm trying to get to the point that the commissioner raised, which is in the construction, in that there are very, as we have known, and we know there are no bridge painters that are female. But so I'm trying to get to what our input can be and whether this advisory committee, which is supposed to be doing, trying to deal with data, is going to be helpful toward that end, or whether that they are going to be useful at all, even within the context of the committee toward that end. So I'm trying to, I mean, if there has, I'm back to my silos issue, which is I think where we began, trying to get the data we need to deal with the mandated report, which we pay. Whether or not looking at this advisory committee as being helpful toward that end. The next question is, can the advisory committee do other things? And I don't know how we get there and how having them in a room gets us there. So I understand the need to be representative, but I don't know whether that ultimately is going to meet your end of, or the functional end of what you were looking at as you proposed it to begin with.
Yeah, I think too, commissioners, a lot of times, you receive information, you receive data, but you need to be able to inform that data through some sort of experience, through an understanding of what's actually happening. And I think in that way, if we expand our original thought for what the size of the committee would be, if we expand to include some of the larger agencies, that may help inform some of their numbers so that we have a better understanding of what's actually happening.
So that's the next Commissioner Yu.
Yeah, I had a question about this, and I watched some of the previous meetings of this commission. How do gender discrimination that is actually showing up in the data? So it's showing, so for instance, I think one of the meetings talked about how, ACS, it has, it's a lot of women in ACS. Well, historically, we know those were the jobs that women were pushing. So it's not surprising that there's a ton of social workers who are women who are ACS today. For instance, looking at the police department, the discrimination that took place, the fire department. So how does that function to work? And I don't know what we as a commission can do about it, because that's what excited me, and I'm curious to see how do you change that? But we have to factor in, because that's what's showing up in the data from what I saw that was being discussed. I'm like, of course there are not a ton of women in the transportation department, like, or in construction jobs. Like, why are we surprised about that? That's what society, those are society issues that we're looking at. how would you then say, okay, gotta remember that this existed, so that's why this is coming out here? And then, you know, have, because it's not, I don't think it's the agent per se, but it's part of, you know, the problem.
I think
A bunch of
some of that discussion, if we go into executive session to discuss personnel issues and to discuss work product, some of those strategy discussions, we have tip of the iceberg, the executive session that we're going to go into momentarily. But then I think the EPC has an orientation that at some point all commissioners are going to go through to explain like the role of the EPC, our role, the guardrails, the parameters. Also, more specifically, what about policy, procedures, practices that agencies may or may not be doing that are contributing factors to the outcome that we see? And to the extent that our audits are calibrated in such a way to identify, pick up on these things in a timely way and in a way that some practices kind of like escape us because we're not like this. Saw the article a couple of months back of folks who have been under allegations of sexual harassment, but resigned or leave the job, and that process doesn't play out, only to then find themselves employed with another city agency. So things like that may even escape. So that kind of thoughtful discussion, that kind of deep diving will happen in tandem with a full orientation as well as just how we can engage in this topic. You know, how we can stretch our own brain.
I mean, and I think it's just now, I'm thinking it might be a factor in like who we invite to this particular project. So.
Mr. Rich?
We have through several different charter revision commissions attempted to change what we are in charter so that we have at least a limit, so that we have an ability to, one of our recommendations is if you find someone who is discriminated, they can't hire for 6 months. An attempt to have something that is really a hammer so that we can change performance. Right now, we haven't. So historically, we have found the fire department over the last 10 years to discriminate. We've seen trying to have our helping. Here, we can, in a report site that they've done in one city. That report goes to the mayor, rarely if ever makes it into the media. We are, will take it. Without having any ability and any remedy, it is very difficult for us to do change performance. The reason I earlier said that we have asked Jennifer the question is whether or not they've been complying with it. That at least says they're sharing the data and not fighting. We have had the quotas are not going to give us data. But once the data is there, there's little we can do with it.
The executive session that we have to hold forward for discussions that now I'd like to do point of privilege to legal reserve comments, so we could work our way through the agenda. And because sometimes we can get stuff at the end, and at the end is the time we want to like not necessarily engage that stuff. So next we can go to the audit update with the general counsel.
So I'll provide a little bit of background for the audits that we're currently doing for the new commissioners. Right now, we're starting year 1 of a 4-year audit plan. The agency is required by the charter to conduct audits of every single entity under our jurisdiction at least once every 4 years. So that is approximately 142 entities. And we try to break that up over the course of the 4 years as equally as we can. So we are starting year 1 and we're doing an employment practices audit with focus on underutilization. There are 20 standards that speak to things such as policy distribution, training of employees, EEO staff and their credentials, how underutilization was addressed in terms of selection processes, how underutilization was addressed in terms of recruitment processes.
Jennifer, why don't you supply the audit questions to each of the new commissioners?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Why don't you supply the audit questions to each of the two commissioners so they can see?
I can provide the standards, after the meeting.
To all of us.
I think I sent them to you, but if not, I'm happy to send again.
Like,
Yep,
any-
Absolutely.
any information on them is always good.
Yep. So this year we initiated 18 audits of what we call big agencies, which are basically agencies that are more than community boards. Right now, we're in the process of drafting 15 of the 18 preliminary determinations. We had to shuffle things around because we lost an EO program analyst, so we're working with one less than we normally would. And then we had some issues with our technology and getting our program up and running so that we can use it to generate our documents and track our findings. For the benefit of the other commissioners, after the preliminary determinations are sent, which is really the meat and potatoes of our audit, it's where we go through every audit standard and determine and make finding of whether or not the standard has been implemented, and if not, what needs to be done. Agencies have approximately 2 weeks to respond to that. We look at their response. Maybe they've implemented something, maybe we missed something, and then we issue a final determination. And upon the issuance of the final determination, the agency goes into compliance monitoring to basically, we work with them to make sure everything that has not been implemented is taken care of as soon as possible. So that's the flow. Once we get the PDs, preliminary determinations out, it starts to pick up very quickly. But right now we are, like I said, it's a new audit with new standards. We have 2 new analysts. So we are working our way through them. And our PDs are taking a little bit longer. But I still think we're going to be able to make our numbers come probably at the next meeting. I will have standards for you. We are going to be initiating audits of, I believe, 18 community boards. They have different standards because we only have jurisdiction over the district offices and there's not as many employees. And when we initiate them, those audits go very quickly because they're much smaller. So that is the update on where we stand with the audits at this point.
Next, we have, it's actually the bulk of that conversation with the president executive session, but next we have an update. Should be maybe, well, I'm not sure who's gonna give an update. It's the new
Actually,
director.
it'll be me.
Okay, so, executive director, and the research update.
All right, so I'll provide the update on the research report for this meeting, but subsequent meetings will be done by the director of research. Just quite simply, the second report that we've been working on, we're continuing to work on. It is late. It was due in February, on February 15th. But we made some major revisions in terms of the approach and the perspective of how we're presenting the information. And we feel that we're getting very close now to being able to issue the report. And we look forward to discussing the draft report in the third executive session.
Next section, public hearing status.
So I'll also take this one. We don't have a public hearing that's being scheduled at this point. It's just kind of been on the calendar just to kind of carry it on as a placeholder to know that part of the research duties, the duties of the research unit is to produce a public hearing. The last public hearing we held was just on June 9th of this year. So we typically hold them every other year because that's what we have funding for. We did not get funding in this fiscal year for a public hearing for, let's say, next year, but we would get the funding in the following.
But I wish to add for the 2 new commissioners that this particular public hearing, which was held virtually, had a far greater attendance than we've ever had before. Well over 200 members that were there and stayed for the entire meeting. And we received very affirmative comments afterwards. So I would vote for, even when we can have one in person, perhaps to do it virtually again, because it means that people don't have to leave their desks and can attend. And it turns out, if you will, as an experiment, that turned out to be far better. It also reduced some of the costs so that you don't have to rent the space. And it may well be that doing it that way, you can do it more frequently. We don't know that yet, but we should look at it. And to some of the topics that we've been talking about, we may want to focus on something, looking at inclusion and looking at how people can be included in the workforce. It may well be that a portion of the lack of promotion is a lack of inclusion. And I don't quite know how we mandate inclusion, because I don't think you can, but you can talk about changing environments. Maybe that's a piece that we look at and try to get some speakers who have been successful doing that. Anyway, it's just a thought that I throw out. But again, I wanted for the two new commissioners to understand that this was the most successful public hearing we have had, and certainly the time that I've sat on.
This is an area where individual commissioners take a lead in terms of what types of hearings, symposium, to see what they can do, and also share yourself, take the lead, organize, correct them. So you can see various viewpoints on how to. Online, virtual business, are we doing it remote? Some cost savings there. It's nice. That's also a great way to see things.
And just to add to Commissioner, if the commissioners have relationships with experts in the field that would be willing to come forward, that would be great.
So next, other business is, a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of discussing a personnel matter as well as work product. Have a motion to go into executive session. Commissioner, please move. Commissioner Yearwood seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nays? Hearing none, we've, now it's approved to exit public session, to go into executive session for the purposes that were described